On February 1st, 2025, President Trump signs the order, unleashing a trade war on America's oldest and closest ally. It was a show of force, a high-stakes bluff designed to bring a partner to its knees. Canada fired back with a stunning retaliation, and the two nations plunged into a costly stalemate. But the bluff has backfired, and the heaviest price isn't being paid in Ottawa. It's being paid at the checkout counter, on the factory floor, and on the family farms of ordinary Americans. How did a policy designed to protect America end up hurting its own people? For generations, the US-Canada relationship was the envy of the world. A multi-trillion-dollar partnership so deeply integrated, it often felt like a single economy. It was a bond forged in steel mills, automotive plants, and on the world's longest undefended border. This wasn't just a trade deal, it was a shared identity, a continental engine of prosperity, built on a foundation of mutual trust and predictability. For businesses and workers, this stability was the bedrock upon which they built their lives. But this foundation began to crack under the seismic pressure of a new confrontational ideology. The Trump administration reframed this historic partnership not as a source of shared strength, but as a story of American victimization. The language of cooperation was systematically replaced by the language of leverage and domination. The first sign of this new, hostile approach was the constant threat of tariffs, treating America's closest ally not as a partner, but as a competitor to be beaten into submission. The decades of trust began to evaporate, creating a toxic atmosphere of uncertainty and setting the stage for a reckless gamble that would test the alliance like never before. On February 1st, 2025, the threats became reality. President Trump launched his long-promised trade war, but his first target was not a distant adversary. It was his next-door neighbor. He signed an executive order imposing a punishing 25% tariff on the vast majority of goods imported from Canada and Mexico, with a 10% levy on Canadian energy. The official justifications were a moving target, but the strategic goal was clear: to use overwhelming economic force as a political bluff. It was a move designed to shock the system, to create a crisis so severe that Canada would be forced to capitulate to a range of American demands. The White House was operating under a simple, core assumption that Canada's economic dependence on the US market was its Achilles heel, and that when faced with a choice between submission and economic ruin, it would have no choice but to fold. This was not a negotiation. It was an act of economic domination. The administration viewed the deeply integrated North American supply chain not as a shared asset, but as a vulnerability it could exploit. When Canada showed no signs of immediate surrender, Trump doubled down. On March 12th, he escalated dramatically, hiking the tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum to a crippling 50%, a move explicitly designed to punish industrial hubs like Ontario for their defiance. This was a high-stakes gamble, a president pushing all his chips to the center of the table, betting that the sheer pain of these tariffs would break the will of his opponent. The bluff was on. But Washington had made a monumental miscalculation. It had mistaken partnership for subservience. The response from Ottawa was not fear, it was fury. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau immediately went before the cameras and announced that Canada would not be bullied. His government fired back with a stunningly forceful and precise retaliation. Canada would match the US tariff for tariff, dollar for dollar. It started with an initial, this wasn't just a defensive measure, it was a declaration of economic sovereignty. Canada was sending a clear and powerful message. You may be 10 times our size, but we will not be your punching bag. The Canadian strategy was to turn the pain back on the United States, to make the consequences of the trade war felt not just in Washington, D.C., but in the communities that formed President Trump's political base. By targeting everything from Kentucky bourbon to Wisconsin dairy, Ottawa was attempting to create a domestic political backlash that would force the president to reconsider. The bluff had been called. the United States had started a trade war, and Canada had just made it clear that it intended to fight. This left the two nations and the entire North American economy locked in a dangerous and costly stalemate. President Trump's high-stakes bluff had backfired. He had expected a quick and decisive victory, but instead found himself mired in a war of attrition against a determined and unified opponent. To back down now would be a humiliating political defeat. But to continue the fight was to allow the economic damage to his own country to mount. He was trapped in a crisis of his own making, with no easy off-ramp. The trade war, launched with a theatrical show of force, had descended into a grim reality of fractured supply chains, volatile markets, and a level of diplomatic hostility between the two allies not seen in modern history. As the stalemate dragged on, it became brutally clear who was paying the real price for this political gamble: ordinary Americans. The tariffs, both Trump's and Canada's retaliation, acted as a stealth tax on everything. Independent analysis from the Tax Foundation calculated the cost at an extra $1,300 per year for the average American household. Senator Chuck Schumer warned the number could be as high as $4,000. It was the price of groceries, of a new car, of building materials for a home. As the Council of Canadians aptly put it, these were not tariffs on Canada. They were a tax on hardworking Americans. The very people the policy was supposed to help were the ones being hurt the most. According to an AP NORC poll in April, half of all Americans expected the tariffs to lead to higher prices, and a clear majority felt the president had gone too far. In the American Midwest, this economic pain was compounded by an environmental crisis. Farmers in states like Ohio and Michigan were already being squeezed by extreme weather, drought, floods, and crop diseases. The trade war was the final straw. When Canada retaliated and China followed suit with its own duties, the market for American soybeans collapsed, with exports hitting their lowest level in 2 centuries. The government offered billions in subsidies, but much of it failed to reach the small family farms on the brink of collapse. The stress was immense, leading to a tragic mental health crisis across farm country, with suicide rates soaring to 3.5 times the national average. A policy designed to project strength was breaking the backbone of rural America. While Canada's defiance was a matter of national pride, it was not without significant cost. For a mid-sized manufacturer in Ontario, the United States isn't just a market, it's the market. Their entire business is built on the seamless flow of goods across the border. Trump's 25% tariff was a body blow, instantly making their products more expensive and less competitive than those from an American rival. Long-standing contracts were put in jeopardy, and plans for expansion were put on ice. The future that had once seemed certain was now clouded by a trade war they did not start and could not control. But the pain was coming from both directions. To fight back, their own government had to impose retaliatory tariffs. Now, the American-made steel they needed as a raw material for their own products was suddenly 25% more expensive. This is the cruel logic of a trade war. This Canadian business was being squeezed from both sides. Their costs were going up while their sales were going down. They supported their government's stand against the US bluff, but they were the ones caught in the crossfire. Their business and their employees' livelihoods held hostage in a high-stakes political battle. The cost of standing up for sovereignty was being paid on the factory floors of towns across Canada. A president's high-stakes bluff, met by a neighbor's defiant resolve, has backfired, leaving the world's most successful partnership in tatters. The trade war, launched to Project American Strength, has instead inflicted a heavy toll on its own citizens, on its families, its farmers, and its factories. With both nations entrenched in a costly stalemate, the foundation of trust that once defined North America has been shattered, with no easy path back. In the race to define the future, will North America win together, or will both nations lose by trying to go it alone? Are you American or Canadian? Share your story and your perspective in the comments below.